I started in the industry back in 1980 something, and most of you weren't even alive back then. And back in those days, there wasn't really an industry. It was just a tiny hobbyist, crazy thing to do. And I realized very early on that if you started to think in an innovative and creative way, brilliant things could happen. And I became obsessed through the titles I was doing with innovation. Back in 1989 and in the early 90s, it was considered the most cardinal sin, this is unbelievable, the most cardinal sin to actually make a sequel. It was akin to jumping off a cliff. And so all the magazines and all the press would say, oh, they're just cashing in on the sequel. And that locked into my mindset that I must create something different every time I make a game, which quite honestly was insane. And back in those days, I could have made so much more money and been so much more successful if I had just ignored what the press was saying about the sequels and really just focused on creating one of these, rather than going from the first game called Populous to Syndicate, and from Syndicate to Magic Carpet to Theme Park, and Theme Park to Dungeon Keeper. What I should have done is said, right, let's do another Populous, or let's do another Syndicate. And that mindset really kept on going through, unbelievably, through the 2000s. It wasn't really until we were acquired by Microsoft that someone sensible came to me and said, stop doing original games, for God's sake. Just focus on doing Fable 1, Fable 2, Fable 3. And that's exactly what we did, and slowly Fable got a little bit better and better. But still, in my heart, there was this craving to work on something fresh and new and different. And I wondered how crazy that thought was. So I actually left Microsoft and started a mobile company, and we have been successfully searching, for the golden goose that innovation can create for you. And now, after working in the casual and mobile space, I've come to realize some important things about innovation. I really want to cover that with you now. And then when we've covered that innovation thing, I want to hand over to Milo, who is the designer here, when he'll be able to talk about his experiences at 22 Cans and with the way we innovate. So this thought occurred to me about the importance of innovation. How unique is the games industry? Well, I like to think of ourselves as, we're bigger than the movie industry, we're bigger than the music industry, we're the new frontier of entertainment. But think about this a second. That when TV came around, they were in the same place we are sort of now. They were the cutting edge, the frontier of new entertainment. And what happened, in a very similar way as what's happened here, is the movie industry, especially the television industry, started to obsess about certain franchises. Now, the first franchise they really obsessed about was one, and this is a personal opinion, you'll probably be able to shoot it down, but the first one that they really obsessed about was something called I Love Lucy. And all the TV executives thought, that's what people want. They want I Love Lucy. And there was a ton of I Love Lucy clones. Originally, when I Love Lucy first came out, it was very unique and innovative, but after, for about 10 years, 7 to 10 years, really what the television studios wanted were I Love Lucy clones. It kind of sounds a bit familiar to where we are today. But then someone came along with something called Bonanza and Gunsmoke. And the TV and the movie industry said, that's what people want. They're not interested in I Love Lucy. They're interested in westerns, shooting. They're interested in the social dynamic between cowboys. And sure enough, everybody went out and made a whole load of westerns. And whenever you turned on the TV, there was Rawhide and Gunsmoke and all the others. And again, the television industry said, that's what people want. They want westerns. They don't want I Love Lucy, they want westerns. And so this repeats on. It goes on where we as consumers get fascinated with a certain franchise, and that franchise then dominates what is being made, and everyone makes games like that, or television programs like that. And we can go right up to the present day where, in the 2000s we had American Idol, and we thought, everything in TV was going to be about reality TV programs. And my argument is that if you look at the charts on the App Store, they're kind of similar to this graph. There are things stuck in the charts, incredibly impressive things stuck in the charts, like, everything from Clash of Clans to Candy Crush Saga. And we as people think that's what people want. But my point is, at some point, someone's going to come along and make something different. Maybe it's something like Fortnite. And that's where innovation comes in. It comes in because it suddenly, it's like a flash of lightning out of a clear blue sky. Suddenly, it redefines the way consumers think about things, the way we as an industry think about things, and the way that we make things. So let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about what innovation is. Now, the temptation to think is, innovation is all about having an idea that has never existed before. This is the way I used to define innovation. It's all about having an idea that never existed before. But that's wrong. And it's taken me about 30 years of working into this industry to realize it's wrong. Actually, if we look at something like Candy Crush Saga, there's an enormous amount of innovation in there. Because what they actually did, and I have no evidence for this, but this is the way I think about what they did. They took something like Bejeweled, which was a slightly clunky match-3 game. There was no real kind of, you just played Bejeweled in the same way as you used to play Tetris. There was no real challenge there, you just played level after level. They took that and they made that delightful. And I love that word, delightful. They introduced, lovely sound effects, a little bit of staging with the characters around it. They showed a map that seemed to go on forever, and people loved it. And I call that as innovative as anything else that you see. Similar to Clash of Clans, which was an incredible revolution. Actually, I think what they did was to take an incredibly simple version of Command and Conquer and SimCity. And they asked themselves, how can we give everyone the experience that you get in SimCity and Command and Conquer? And they combined the two together and created something like Clash of Clans. And even something like Fortnite, they took the it was slightly buggy experience, wasn't it, of PUBG and Battle Royale games. There was a Battle Royale mod in Minecraft. It was buggy, it was it was that graphical style which really didn't resonate enough with a mass audience, and they layered innovation into that experience. And these are the successful titles that we've got at the moment. So innovation, my point is, innovation isn't just about having an idea that no one's ever had before. In fact, I think it's probably much more challenging to have that idea. So where we stand at the moment, where we stood about 2 years ago, we move to the next slide, we stood with me thinking, I really think it's time to start approaching a title that is going to be like the difference between Rawhide and I Love Lucy. It's that step change. But what do you do with that? Well, the first thing that we did was come up with the most wonderful, delightful mechanic, something that is incredibly complicated, but making it simple and accessible. So that's the first thing. We had a core of an idea. That was about 2 years ago. And then the next thing that we did was to find a team that absolutely embraced innovation. Embraced innovation in the way we approach it. Embraced the idea that an idea that you're working on would fail. It's going to fail, but in failing, you learn an awful lot. And what I'd like Milo to do is just to discuss, we'll sit down here, and we're just going to discuss our approach to innovation, and then we'll come back to me again. Milo, over to you.
And hello, Casual Connect. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to be able to share with you my experience at 22 Cans, and also talk a little bit about how I operate within the very iterative and innovation-driven environment that we have. So when I am aiming to generate innovative content, what I like to focus on are 4 key points. But before I go into those 4 key points, I'd love to tell you a little anecdote about work. Usually when I'm working on a design, I like to get a little bit of quick feedback. And Peter's sitting next to me, so I'll nudge him and I'll say, can you have a look at this, please? He'll usually have a look, and the feedback I'll usually get is something like, make it simpler. So I'll go away, I'll do my little changes, and I'll show it to him again, and once more, make it even simpler. Now, it took me a little while to truly comprehend the importance and the impact that simplicity can have on a product. But once I was able to work this knowledge into my workflow, the results were really astounding. And that would pretty much be point 4, and we'll get there. So, my first point. Personally, I feel like when evaluating a solution or a proposal, it's quite important to have good analytical skills. Be able to recognize what a solution does in relation to the brief, what it does not do, and what it needs to do. This also sets up our second point, which is asking the right questions. Because once you analyze what something does and does not do, this leads into asking the right questions for the iteration. But before we talk about questions, I'd like to talk a little bit about failure and how this works within the whole iteration and innovation, how important failure actually is. Now, the common belief is that failure is, attempting something and getting a result that wasn't very satisfactory or wasn't desired. In my personal opinion, when I walk into a design meeting and I propose a design, I get some feedback, maybe it doesn't go through. For me, that isn't a failure. I see it as a success because the next time we walk into that meeting, I feel confident that we're getting closer to the high quality solution we were looking for from the start. In that sense, failure is a very important part of making progress. Which leaves us at point 2, questions. Questions, I feel, are very important to guide creativity. And I find it very important to ask the right questions to the person who's giving you the brief. What are we looking for? And also very important to ask questions to yourself before you actually present something. Am I actually doing what I set out to do? Does this fulfill my criteria? I mentioned that questions really guide creativity. And surprise, that's point 3. And oh gosh, we're already halfway there. 2 out of 4. You guys are great listeners. Thank you very much. I see some of you taking notes. That's great. Wow. Creativity. Now, creativity at 22 Cans is something very special. When I started working here, it was completely different to any place I've worked before. We really encourage creativity. And as a designer, anybody can come up with an idea. Now, we have the prerequisite that anybody who does come up with an idea makes the due diligence to elaborate that idea, put it into slides, and formally present it. And every designer truly has to be able to stand up in front of the rest of the design team and defend that idea. It can get fierce. That's my point 3, creativity. And my final point, ladies and gentlemen, my final point, you may have guessed from the anecdote, but it is to strive for simplicity. Now, this point in and of itself deserves its own talk, but I can tell you one thing, is that I'm really grateful we have Peter Molyneux on our side. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be handing the floor back to Peter.
So, what we're trying to do is create something new and innovative. We feel that we've got a great idea that we're working on. I would love that idea to take months, but in my experience, nurturing something that's never been played by human beings before takes a lot longer. It's more likely to take years. And the reason that that's worth doing is our consumers are getting slightly bored. And if they get bored, we won't be at the front line of entertainment anymore. If they need to be surprised, and that's why we in this industry owe it to our consumers to give them things that they've never seen before. Now that doesn't mean making something unbelievably complicated. It means making something unbelievably simple and, thank you, unbelievably simple and doing it in a way which charms and delights people. Any other questions?
Thank you for your conference. Yeah. I had a question about, is it still possible for nobodies to pitch innovation to publisher because they always want to have metrics and games to relate to when we pitch innovative games, which is the problem I have. And I feel like there is a glass ceiling of conformism today in the video game industry, and it is very hard for new studios to try to bring new experience and get funded too. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. Innovation is very, very difficult, especially difficult when I showed that slide and you were in the middle of a period of time where everyone thinks the definition of entertainment is this. You know, the definition of, making money from consumers is match 3 games. And it's very hard to go along to a publisher or go along to anyone and say, hey, it's not a match 3 game. Oh, that's disappointing. So you've got to pick your moment. Now, 3 years ago, it wasn't the right moment for an innovational title. It wasn't the right moment to actually say, right, now's the time to question, what people think about the industry. But my suspicion is, as you saw from that slide that I showed you about the TV industry, that things work in 7 to 10 year cycles, and we're getting close to the end of a cycle. You can just feel it in social media that people are just getting bored. Oh, yeah, sure enough, Clash of Clans and Candy Crush and a few other titles are still incredibly successful. Just like the last season of I Love Lucy was incredibly successful. But I think we're changing it. That's the first point. The second point, when you are presenting your idea to a publisher or you're presenting that idea to an internal team, what you've got to present has to be, at its heart, the most charming. It has to be charming, and most crucially, it has to be understandable. It's no good going in and saying, there's this amazing game and it does this and this and this and this and this and this. Really, I learnt one fascinating thing from someone in the industry called Bing Gordon, who was he was the Chief Creative Officer of Electronic Arts back in the 1990s. And in the early days of my career, I had a really important meeting where I was going to pitch 3 ideas to him. And, this is when I was a completely unknown developer. And I turned up in San Francisco to their head offices, and to give the pitch, I was incredibly nervous. I was sweating, and I just felt absolutely terrible. And I got into the lift to go up to the meeting room, and nightmare. Bing Gordon got in the lift with me. And, I said in a shaky voice, hello, Bing, I'm about to present you with my game ideas. We're going to have a meeting and present you the game ideas. And he said to me, if you can't tell me what your ideas are by the time the lift gets to our floor, they're not worth this. It's not worth me listening. I said, okay, this is a big skyscraper. What floor are we on? He said, floor 2. But he was right. If you can't grab someone either by visuals or by concept very early on with an innovational idea, it won't work. If you think of some of the games that I've worked on, they design and build your own theme park. That's so clear and simple, and it was the first kind of game of its type. Be a bad guy and run a dungeon in Dungeon Keeper. Be a god in Populous. Those are all the sweet lines where it just fires people's imagination. Thank you very much.
When you're coming up with new ideas and you're thinking about innovation, how granular do you think about the audience that you're targeting for that idea? Is it something that's different idea to idea, or are you always trying to make games for everyone, or do you think of a very targeted persona and go for that? Where does it?
Yeah, well, firstly, thinking of an idea that's going to excite the consumer that you're after. Now, I'll give you a really good example. I love space games. I love anything set in space. Fantastic, I'd love to do a space game. But explaining that to a casual audience, trying to get them excited about that is challenging. You're already setting yourself a big hurdle. So when you're thinking of an idea, I'd love to show you the idea, but if I show it to you, you immediately get it. I had this idea about how I could make everyone feel creative. That's really what I want. Is because if everyone get the same sensation that I get when I have a great idea, and knowing that people see it, that could be a great thing. And then trying to find the right home for that idea. All the time in the back of my mind is, I've got to make it for this audience. I've got to, as Milo said, I've got to make it simple. I've got to take this unbelievably complex thing and make it simple enough that people totally understand it and are interacting it within 5 seconds. So, whatever idea that you're going to choose, you've got to have in your mind all the time, right, it's a great idea, I can explain it to people, but I've got to make it so simple that all of my audience will be able to play it. That's if you're going after a casual audience. If you're going after a core audience, your thought process is very, very different. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.